Who's, of the skydivers here, who's been hypoxic? I reckon there's about 10, 15 hands. Who's been in an aeroplane above 10,000 feet? That's quite a lot of people. And that's quite an interesting difference between those two, because from a physiological and medical point of view, I'm pretty sure that all the ones who raised their hands the second time have been hypoxic. And it's very much a question of degree as to how hypoxic you were, for how long, and how or if it affected you. And I think I often like to compare hypoxia to drunk driving. Most of the time, on a Friday night in England or the US, lots of people drive home when they're over the limit, and they get away with it most of the time, and they don't have an accident, and they probably drive just fine. But just as often, in skydiving, I think there's a lot of skydivers that are hypoxic out there, and they get away with it. But occasionally we see examples of when they are hypoxic, and we don't really pay much attention to it. So hypoxia, we use the word. Skydivers use the word a lot. It's used in marketing for skydiving. It's used on products for skydiving. It's used in advertising campaigns. But what does it really mean? Now, if I look in one of my medical textbooks, it says that it is inadequate oxygen tension at the cellular level characterized by tachycardia, hypertension, peripheral vasoconstriction, dizziness, and mental confusion. Other than the last two words, most people are none the wiser as to what hypoxia is. But I think, as I said to you before, all skydivers have experienced a degree of hypoxia, but it's a question of how much and for how long. Now, you're all BPA members, I think, or most of you are, so you've all read and inwardly digested the BPA operations manual. Some of you probably sleep with it under your pillow. So you'll be very familiar with section 5, subsection 1, paragraph 1. Normal parachuting will not take place above flight level 120. I'm sure you knew that. You also will know, therefore, that parachuting will only take place between flight level 120 and 150 without oxygen, provided that a number of conditions are met. And these are all very, very sensible conditions, and they're most about time. How much time you can be above 10,000 feet, how much time you can be above 12,000 feet. 6 minutes above 12,000 feet. How many of you have started your watch? Now, you don't have to, because the pilot in the aircraft has done that. And also, you know that if those time limits or altitudes are exceeded, so if you ever go above flight level 150, then as per the rule book, the drop will be aborted and the parachutist will land with the aircraft, which we know happens quite a lot when these numbers are exceeded. 6 minutes is not a long time, but that rule is there for a very good reason. But I don't think this is promulgated widely enough throughout skydiving, and some parts of the world don't have rules that are this strict. But why do we have these rules? Let's talk about the atmosphere. Anyone remember A-level physics, GCSE physics, basic primary school physics? How much oxygen do we have here at sea level? What's the percentage of oxygen in the atmosphere? 21%. Okay, so if we go to, say, 25,000 feet, anyone want to take a guess at what the percentage of oxygen is at, say, 25,000 feet? How much? 70? Okay. It's 21%. It's still 21%. The difference is the atmosphere is less. There's less atmosphere. So there's less atmosphere, still 21% of that atmosphere is oxygen. Another way to look at it is this diagram showing all of the air molecules are more densely concentrated the closer you are to the surface. As you go higher, they get further apart. Now, 1 in 5 of these air molecules, roughly 21%, is an oxygen molecule. So when you take a lungful down here at sea level, you're getting more oxygen molecules because you're getting more molecules. When you go up here, you take a lungful, you get much less oxygen molecules. And in absolute terms, the pressure difference, to put it so that you understand it, about 1,000 millibars, standard sea level air pressure, not often in the UK. But at 33,000 feet, you're down to 282, so not much more than 20% of the actual total amount of atmosphere. Now, for complex physiological reasons, it's not just a straightforward reduction in the amount of oxygen available. The oxygen actually follows a harsher reduction because of the way our lungs have to warm the air that we breathe and have to humidify them. A bit too much for this lecture, but just please understand that it's not a law, it's a law of diminishing returns. The higher you go, the harder it gets, and more so the higher you go. A bit of a history lesson. way back in the day, scientists started to think that things got harder the higher we went. And back in the 19th century, there was two British scientists, Coxwell and Glaisher, who took a prize from the British Association of Science to go and investigate the atmosphere. So they got a hot air balloon, and they were going to shoot off up there and find out what it was like. And they took some interesting equipment with them. They took a thermometer, a hygrometer, a compass, a watch, some scissors, a magnifying glass, a bottle of brandy, and 6 pigeons. And off they went, up and up in the balloon. Nice day. An hour later, they were about 29,000 feet. Interestingly, they did not have any warm clothing, and they did not have any oxygen. And strangely, they noticed that their ability to take notes became quite quickly impaired. Now, they sensibly reached for the brandy, but when they did, they found that they couldn't actually reach it. Their arms weren't doing what they were telling them to do. I don't know why this was, but maybe it was something to do with the altitude. They basically collapsed in the basket, and after some time, one of them managed to pull the descent cord using his teeth and put the balloon into a descent. Coxwell beautifully documented that he began to fear the worst for his partner. He began to fear that he would never take any more readings. He bravely poured brandy over his cold hands. It's all quite bizarre, isn't it? And they landed in the countryside in Ludlow. They had to walk 7 miles to go to a pub for a drink, and I think they really much deserved a drink because they'd been to 30,000 feet in a balloon with no oxygen and actually given us our best description of the day, and actually still to this day an accurate description of what hypoxia is and what can go wrong. So some Frenchmen learned from this, and a little while later they decided they were going to go and do it better. Now, the French got quite good at balloons because during a siege of Paris in the 19th century, they used balloons to send messages and get people out of the city of Paris. So they had balloons that were very good at climbing high and climbing fast, and they decided they were going to take bags of oxygen. So they filled bags of oxygen, and off they went in their balloon, which actually went up like a rocket. And 2 of them are buried in a cemetery in Paris. There is some debate about whether they actually succumbed to hypoxia or all the consequences of rising too rapidly in the balloon, but it still serves to this day, if you walk through the cemetery in Paris, as a memorial of what can happen if you expose yourself to hypoxia, and even if you try to mitigate it, if you do it wrong. So what happens when we're hypoxic? Well, we saw from the balloonists, their ability gets less, but yet they get very confident. They start doing things like reaching for the brandy. Often they don't appreciate the nature of the problem, and we're going to see this in a video. I've taken an excerpt from a BBC documentary where one of their presenters was going to go in a high-altitude flight in one of the, I think it was a U-2 spy plane, and he got to the very controlled environment of a depressurization chamber, and there's a beautiful 3-minute piece of footage here watching somebody being videoed being exposed to hypoxia. They won't believe that it was anything to do with the hypoxia or all their fault, and there'll be a million other explanations for what happened. And I think if we look critically at a lot of aviation accidents where hypoxia is a possible explanation, it's very, very difficult to prove, but I think, in all honesty, it probably plays a greater part than we realise. So we've got this atmosphere here. How are we going to get around this problem? We know what the problem is now. We know what we want to not do. How are we going to make this better? So airliners have to solve the problem too. How do they solve the problem? Well, this is Concorde flying at between 55 and 65,000 feet. How are they going to get around this problem? Why does every Concorde passenger, not that there are any anymore, why do they not act like the guy in the video? Yeah, because of pressurization. So we take that thin atmosphere that we saw in that diagram, we squeeze it down so it becomes exactly the same, or nearly so, the composition of the atmosphere down below. So we breathe it and we get along just fine. How else could we do this? Well, we can add oxygen. We can add oxygen to what we're breathing. So instead of 1 in 5 of the molecules we're breathing, we can add oxygen so that, say, 6, 8, or 5 in 10. Hey? I'm hypoxic. up to 100% of what we breathe is oxygen. If you've ever gone to see your granny in hospital, you'll have seen some nasal cannulas placed gently in the nose, and that's a very good way of delivering a little bit of extra oxygen. You can't deliver too much, but this will be used by a lot of light aviation, general aviation pilots flying at altitudes of up to about 17 or 18,000 feet. It's not necessarily suitable for skydiving for quite obvious reasons. It's not likely to stay there on the face, and even if it did, the air rushing past it's probably going to create all sorts of vacuums and gas flow phenomena that will mean that the oxygen won't be where you want it to be. But we don't want to be a Frenchman, so we don't want to have oxygen, say that we're using oxygen, and not use it properly. So it's absolutely crucial that we get oxygen from our cylinder to our brain the right way. And it's often executed incorrectly. So I've been to drop zones all over the world where they go, yeah, sure, yeah, we jumped from 22,000 feet from the King Air, and we have an oxygen system. And I get in the back of the King Air, and there's a small cylinder about this big, attached to a tiny regulator that's dialed to 2 litres per minute, and then after that regulator, it's split into 20 occupancy seats. And they go, yeah, and the oxygen cylinder just lasts ages. And then I also see correctly installed installations where the oxygen cylinder is divided correctly to all the jumpers, and there's just a hose end. There's just the end of a hose, and they go, there's your oxygen. And that's actually very, very common in drop zones all over the world to see supplemental oxygen delivered from the end of a hose. And I think that's about as much use as a chocolate teapot. I really, really do. And it even features in some of the videos that you were seeing. So when we think about parachuting free-fall permanent oxygen systems, this is what probably comes to mind. This is a Special Forces troop. He's bristling with oxygen cylinders on a diluter demand system. And there's many reasons why this isn't suitable for sports skydiving, as I'm sure you'll instantly agree. It's heavy, it's complicated, it's extremely expensive. That system will cost between about $25,000 and $30,000 per system. It's very complicated, so the training is very involved. Because it's complex, it's also easy to damage, and if it's damaged, its failure modes are complex as well. It's also very uncomfortable and heavy, and anyone who has done any military jumping with these systems will testify thus. So the more difficult it is to do something, the less inclined we are to do it, and the less inclined we are to do it properly, even more so. And this is a theme that runs through engineering and problem solving. But if you do have a nice, light, comfortable oxygen system, you can integrate it with a sport parachuting system. This is myself and some colleagues jumping in Nepal. The Skydive Everest project is a project where we take people to Nepal. We jump next to Mount Everest. From altitudes, we've jumped as high as 30,000 feet. We take off from altitudes of 13,000 feet with landing altitudes of 13, 15, and 18,000 feet. And we always use a free-fall oxygen system. And we've had people doing free-fly routines, relative work skydives, and all of them say that the system is easy to wear, comfortable to wear, and they're basically just the same as they are on a normal sports skydive. And that's actually key for people wanting to come back and do more sports skydiving. And also, even though we're regularly jumping between 25 and 30,000 feet, our performance is the same as at sea level, and we haven't had any suspicious hypoxic events. We've also had the great joy of helping Red Bull and the Soul Flyers to do a very ambitious project in the Alps. They did a free-fall routine, a 60-second free-fly routine, jumping from the aircraft at 33,000 feet. It's not often that you'll see a jump aircraft leave a contrail. That's because it was minus 52 degrees at exit altitude. They did a 60-second free-fly routine. They opened their canopies over the top of Mont Blanc, and then they canopy swooped on very small high-performance canopies all the way down the ridges, landing in Italy. And the whole time they were on free-fall oxygen and personal oxygen systems. I'm going to show you their video at the end. There are some other issues with jumping at high altitude, especially jumping very high. There's a phenomenon called the flyer's bends. We've all probably heard of the bends. It's what we associate it with divers. Very briefly, a diver goes down into a high pressure environment where they take on more nitrogen, and when they then return to a lower pressure environment, what happens in their blood and the gases in their blood is like taking the lid off of a Coke bottle. The gases that are absorbed within the fluid form little bubbles, and the effect on that person is the bends. Now, although you have to go very high very quickly in skydiving to produce that same effect, it is a risk. The risk is very small below 25,000 feet and less so below 18,000 feet, but it is something as you start to go higher you do need to mitigate. If you've ever seen the Special Forces operating, they will do a phenomenon called pre-breathing. Pre-breathing is where you sit breathing 100% oxygen for up to 30 minutes before you get in the aircraft, so that you saturate your body with oxygen and your body will exchange oxygen for nitrogen. So because you've got less nitrogen on your body, when you climb to the lower pressure environment, much less chance of experiencing the bends. Most sports skydiving, that just becomes such a faff, in all honesty, that we try and keep sports skydiving exit altitudes to below 25,000 feet. The cold, as mentioned with the contrail behind the King Air, we're dealing with much colder temperatures. Because our jump plane, usually we keep it nice and warm, core temperature isn't a problem, it's usually the extremities, so toes and fingers get very cold in free fall when you're dealing with minus 50 temperatures, and definitely something to consider. I'm going to hand over to Ted for a moment, and I'll come back to you and introduce you to Brian, and Ted's going to tell you about why he's here with us today and how he got involved with skydiving.
Thanks, Ryan. Ryan's a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Can everyone hear me if I don't use the... Yeah, the back of it? Smashing. This is me, as was, who I used to be, with a dodgy moustache that I had to shave off when I left the RAF. So, my career, 33 years as an aerosystems engineering officer, worked on fast jets and finally on search and rescue helicopters. For pretty much my whole career, I was involved in mountaineering, specifically the RAF Mountain Rescue Service. So I got opportunities to go to the Himalayas and other great ranges, and I got opportunities to climb. Now, Ryan asked you a question before, he said, who's been hypoxic? I've got a question to ask you, because I'm the deep and sensitive part of this act. And my question is, who likes poetry? Just you people like poetry? That's good. Okay, my next slide takes me to a poem that I love. And it's by Rudyard Kipling. It's called If. If you can keep your head while those around are losing theirs and blaming it on you. And I use this quote because when you get hypoxic, you are effectively losing your head. And if you can keep your head, you stay alive. If you lose your head, you end up dead. And this next slide shows a climber who I had to climb past a couple of years ago, who has died on the fixed ropes. This was tragic. He's only been dead for about 2 days. He was the only climber who was climbing on the mountain, which was 8,500 meters, who was not using oxygen. In the old days, when we set off to climb Mount Everest, for every 10 climbers who climbed the mountain, 1 would die trying. Why do people die climbing Everest? It was commonly held in my mountaineering community that we died for lack of oxygen. We died for want of oxygen. This was never true. We died because we got hypoxic and made the mistake which killed us. That mistake might be not turning around when you should turn around when you run out of time. Very often it was that mistake. The statistic for those who chose to climb without oxygen was deaths of 1 in 3. The statistic for climbing Everest without oxygen is still 1 in 3. But for those climbers now who choose to use oxygen to climb Mount Everest, the statistic has changed from 1 in 10 to less than 1 in 700. I've got a letter confirming this from the chairman of the Nepalese Mountaineering Association, thanking Topa for our work in the industry to make this happen. Now, the statistic here kind of jumps off the page. When the oxygen systems got better, people stopped dying. the people stopped dying because they stopped making the mistakes which were killing them. Thank you, Ryan. So, where did this journey start for me? I've always been a mountaineer, and the slide where I'm in the blue jacket shows me on Everest in 1988 when I accidentally ended up in charge of the oxygen systems there. And I call this shot here my bad hair day, because earlier that day I'd been on fire when the petrol stove I was using burst into flames and all my hair got singed, and then later on filling oxygen cylinders, decanting them using a dodgy gauge which wasn't reading correctly. One of the cylinders exploded while I was doing the job. So I've been learning about oxygen for a long time, and I learned it the hard way in many cases. The other slide on the right there, that's me 16 years later. I've gone back to Everest, this time on my own, to climb the mountain. Now, being an engineer, I'm an analytical type of chap. So I looked at this and said, what can I do to improve my chances of actually succeeding this time? And I had to succeed this time because it was my third attempt to climb the mountain, and I knew I wasn't going back. So I looked at the reasons that stops people from climbing the mountain, and actually stops people. And the biggest setback to having a safe, successful, happy ascent of Mount Everest was the oxygen systems that were available. Nothing had changed in all the years. It was still a mishmash of old medical systems, Russian MiG fighter pilots' masks, and other aviation devices. It was not good. So, how are we going to fix that? Well, I didn't know how I was going to fix it. I knew I needed to. I knew that we breathe in a cycle of 3 parts. 2/3 of every cycle you're breathing out, 1/3 breathing in. Conventional oxygen systems delivered oxygen to the mass for the whole time that you were using it. Therefore, 2/3 of the oxygen was being blown out of the atmosphere and wasted, and you didn't have enough oxygen to breathe, which is a terrible state of affairs. So, before I left my unit, I went to the tornado servicing bay where they keep the oxygen supplies to see what might be there that might help me. I couldn't really find anything, but I did a trolley dash around and borrowed some masks and some tubes and some valves and some bits and pieces and some string and chewing gum, and most importantly, a packet of condoms or 2. So I had an idea condoms were going to be the solution. So, I get to base camp, I still haven't figured out what I'm going to do. Every day I get all this stuff out, and I arrange it in front of my tent when after I finish washing my socks, and I look at all these valves and masks and things like, how is this going to work? And then I remembered I hadn't emptied my pee bottle. So at night time, you don't want to get up for a pee because it's so cold, so you have a bottle, you go on your side, and the bottle freezes. You must put it out in the sun the next day, it melts, tip it out. So I'm tipping out my pee bottle, and it's an old Coca-Cola bottle I found in a bin. I think, wait a minute, this is it. This is the solution. I drop one of the condoms inside the Coca-Cola bottle, which will effectively be inside a bottle there. I'll put a tube like this from a tornado's mask on it, attach it to a valve. Inside the mask is another valve. When I breathe out, that valve closes. The oxygen can't come in the mask, it goes down. The condom inflates with oxygen. When I breathe in on the second part of the cycle, I get the oxygen which is collected while I was breathing out. Eureka, we've done it. But, as you can see in that photograph, there's a guy looking at me kind of weird. The whole base camp looking at me kind of weird. I was Ted the bonkers guy who was going to die. And people did not really believe I was going to climb Everest using a prototype oxygen mask, which is a Coca-Cola bottle with a condom in it. But guess what? We flew. We flew up that mountain. We went quickly. I was surprised by how quickly I went. I passed a lot of people. When I got to the summit, I thought to myself, I've got a problem now, because one of my oxygen cylinders had disappeared, gone. Probably, technically, stolen. So, I'm now at the summit, and I've got dregs, the last drops of oxygen left in my tank. I know this. So, I turn around, and I've got to make my way back down, and I think to myself, because I'm going down now, I'll probably be okay. So I turned, and I started to walk down, and a Sherpa who I knew came to me and said, Ted, how are things? How's your oxygen? I said, oh, I think it's all right. And he looked at my gauge and he goes, I said, it says 0. 0. What are you going to do? I said, oh, I'll push on. I'll push on down and see how it goes. And I walked for about 5 minutes and then out. couldn't get up, couldn't stand. So I crawled, and I staggered, and I hallucinated. I had the third man who was with me, my friend who I'm talking to. Be all right. Fine. I knew, part of me knew all the while, that I was dying. And I had to fight, and fight, and fight. But you know what? The thing about dying through hypoxia, through actual oxygen starvation, the death was going to be a beautiful thing. I relished it. I looked forward to it. Death was a glass of mulled wine and a log fire in the pub. It was waiting for me. It was beckoning me. And all I had to do was just stop fighting and allow it to happen. But I didn't. I fought it for long enough, and then I don't remember, because I passed out at some stage. And when I was passed out, someone stepped on my body, and on the satellite phone down to be the first to blog my death, which my wife read on the internet, and my friends, so that was all a bit tragic. Now, what came of that was that someone had put an oxygen cylinder onto my system when I was unconscious and left me in the hope that it would be okay. It was okay. When I woke up, I felt like a new man. I felt like someone had just been asleep. I felt like someone had been resting. And I got up and I made my way down the mountain. Going down the mountain, I met someone I knew, a friend from base camp who was coming up, and he was doing very badly. No one expected him to succeed because he wasn't strong. So I took my mask off and I gave it to him and said, use this mask, you'll go better. He went so much better that his guide couldn't keep up with him. And he summited where no one expected him to. He exceeded instead of succeeding. The outcome of that was that Top Out, the mask system, was pulled into the market to become a commercial product, and 2 years later, we were the market leaders. We'd broken all the records, people used less gas, there were less deaths, it was all a happening place. Now, on from that, there's this team of people called the Everest Skydive, and a man here, Ryan Jackson, and they're looking to improve the oxygen systems that they're using. So, I get a telephone call from the Everest Skydive team saying, hey Ted, how about you come along and help us with this project? And I say, no, I'm not doing it. Not my space. I'm ground-based, don't do it. Not aerial. And so again, Ryan phoned me, and I liked the sound of him, and he sounded like he knew what he was talking about. It sounded challenging, it sounded interesting, it sounded good. And then some words came back to me that I often use to young people when I'm speaking to them. And I said, seek out life's problems, for they are the gateway to opportunity. So wherever you find a problem, you find an opportunity. And this was my problem, looking at me. I thought, there's an opportunity here. And it sounded interesting. So eventually I said, yeah, okay, I will. But the reason why I was hesitant is because of this next slide that's coming up here. And I'd been in another oxygen-related incident, which nearly cost me my life, more nearly than when I was left for dead on Everest. I want you to look at this video clip and bear in mind that I'm in this helicopter, and you start to understand why I had concerns about going back into the air.
I'll play the video.
We're waiting for the video clip. Okay, concerns about going back into the air in Nepal.
Can you play the video clip, guys? No, the other video clip. No, go back to the Prezi.
That clip.
That one.
This is a Russian Mi-17, commonly used to move people around. Okay, I've been in this helicopter for 40 minutes. We've been flying at 5,000 meters and above. When I went back into the wreckage to try and work out what had happened, crash investigation thing that we would do, and I found the oxygen bottle, which was empty. Maybe they'd used it all, but they wouldn't have used it all without an oxygen mask, and there wasn't one of those. So they'd been flying all that time at that altitude without an oxygen mask. Now, when we came into base camp, I'm looking out the window, and I can see the prayer flags from the other camp blowing in the wind, giving perfect wind speed and direction. Absolutely perfect. So I'm thinking to myself, what is this guy doing 20 metres off the ground with such a stiff tailwind? And I'm saying, anytime now, turn it around, anytime now. And you see, as he hits the ground, the thought must have occurred to the pilot, because he is actually trying to bring it around. Too late. Helicopter smashed up. Now, one skydiver can get out of an aircraft, hypoxic, and kill himself. One mountaineer cannot take oxygen to climb Everest and kill himself. One pilot who's hypoxic is not a good place for any of us. So, this is the part actually it's almost embarrassing for me, and I may be murdered in the bar later. My first ever skydive was from 29,000 feet. It was part of the deal. It was the lure to get me to come into the skydiving fold. When I was taken up to Kathmandu, I was having dinner with these guys. I said, listen, the only way I can get involved in this project, when I climbed Everest, I developed a system climbing Everest while I was climbing Everest, because that's how I work. If I'm going to develop a skydiving system with you guys, I would have to skydive so I understand the issues that we're dealing with. They said, Ted, that's what you wanted. Come along. I thought, well, yeah, okay, I'm in. So, I'm attached to Ryan Jackson. We're in a pilot, Porter aircraft, going at the door, 29,000 feet. And that's Mount Everest behind us. And it's amazing. Now, for me as an engineer, one of the best and most amazing parts is the blue sky thing. That I had a whole problem in front of me that I could fix, and a team of people who had the expertise to help me to do it. And a team of people that I trusted with my life, because I don't attach myself to anyone. So it was a brilliant engineer's project, a brilliant experience, which I must admit at first I didn't enjoy so much, because going out of this aeroplane, I've got to think, okay, oxygen, pipe, routing, tubing, is it working, is it flowing? Yeah, it's all good. And by the time I finished doing all that stuff, I was in the last seconds of the skydive, which I eventually woke up and thought, yeah, this is it. This is it. This is where we want to be. Well, I did one more skydive as a tandem, checking out systems, and then it was no longer allowed. I was sent off on an AFF course, and I was made to be a skydiver. So now, I'm like you guys, got the bug, I've got a sport which I really didn't have time for in my life, and now my life revolves around this sport. That's my wife. Yeah, we know that story. So, it was great, because I brought to this sport all the problems and the solutions that we'd encountered on the mountain, and the people who died, and the evolution of putting all that together into a package which is skydivable was superb. It was better still doing it with a team of people that I enjoyed working with so much, and I just didn't believe that anything could surpass that moment when I stood on the top of Mount Everest. And it does, and it still does. And every time I stand at that door, it's still that big moment for me at the moment. Because I've only got 58 jumps. I shouldn't have said that either, should I? Okay, thanks very much, guys.
It's been really interesting bringing Ted into our world of skydiving from mountaineering, and to me, I look at touring him around oxygen in skydiving now, and I think it's very much how Ted started mountaineering in the 80s. It's very primitive, often used wrong, and there are incidents and accidents that happen as a result of poor oxygen use. So now I'm going to go back to those two videos, and I'm going to ask Brian Krause from Sunpath to come and tell us the stories behind the videos, and we'll look at how much what we can see in this video and whether we think it's due to hypoxia.
Holy cow, it's tough to follow Ted after that talk. Incredible, Ted, incredible. Can you play the first video, please?
That's that one. You need to wind it back.
Rewind it back. So this was just this past summer in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. It was Eagles 108-way. And this is a base, just a standard base launching, 8-way base. We were jumping from, I think it was 19 to 20,000 feet. And right here, you can see that base came out perfect. And a guy just let go of the base and tracked away. Did everybody catch that? Tracking underneath there. And now he's a break-off hazard right now. He's up top around 12 o'clock, just kind of spinning in circles. Now everybody sees him down there. Not everybody, but a large majority of the team sees him down here. And now he's a safety factor at breakoff. And he didn't remember what happened. You know, we landed, we're going into debriefs, talking about debriefs, and he didn't honestly have a clue what happened. And I kind of, you know, I guess I'm just going to go back here for a second. When we were in Nepal, I was with the Top Out guys testing some equipment. And we, you know, you get to be friends up there. You're on the mountain, you know, you're almost forced to make friends with everybody. And we just started talking about O2. And I went there thinking I was going to be jumping big military O2 systems that I was used to in the past. And they gave me, you know, this. And I was like, holy cow, there's really not much to this here. And I had on military equipment, but the O2 system was light. And so we just started talking. I said, that could be used in a civilian application. So Ryan and I chatted, and I said, I have a couple of good examples of hypoxia that we just really did this summer. So I sent him some videos, and he's like, you know, that would be great. So right here, jumping tubes, like Ryan said about jumping tubes, sucking on tubes. And I was a plane captain, and I was watching the flow that he talked about, and I was like, you know, crank that thing up. And I'd tell the pilot, crank it up, because I was in the back of the plane where the good O2 is, and I kind of felt like I wasn't getting enough. So I knew the guys at the door weren't quite getting enough either. I was in a Twin Otter. That was the ramp aircraft. Can you play the next video, please? So this is my video. I just happen to have a contour on the side of my head. This is a separate jump. Jumping, once again, 19 to 20,000 feet. And when we watched this video earlier, did you see there's a guy in a white jumpsuit with a blue rig on, and he takes out the formation repeatedly. And he's a personal friend of mine. He's a world record holder, a national champion. And I was looking at him going, what in the heck are you doing, buddy? And I was almost embarrassed for him, watching him, but then I started to get scared for him as the jump went on. And he's right down here, so he's taken the formation out, he's flushed it. He's going to come back up and get it again. It's actually kind of amazing to be that low in a 108-way formation and make it back. And there he goes again. So once again, we've now put ourselves in a somewhat of a situation at break-off altitude. People are out of slot, just trying to make it happen. We landed. I said, Bruce, buddy, what happened up there? He's like, I don't know. He said, last thing I remember is seeing an oxygen tube and thinking, somebody's out of oxygen. Somebody's not breathing oxygen. And I was like, man, it was you. And he's like, you know, he was embarrassed, you know, and he's somebody I look up to with his skill level. But once again, hypoxia can affect anybody. None of us are immune to it. We just had a Gold Night reunion in December. And everybody here know who Joe Kittinger is? Okay, I had the honor of sitting with Joe Kittinger. He's like, you know, how you been doing, BK? What do you have going on? And I said, well, interesting enough, Joe, I'm going to do a presentation with some guys and I told him about Top Out. I said at the BPA AGM, and I said, I'm going to talk about hypoxia. And Joe, you know, he just lit up as a forerunner in high altitude jumps. And he talked about the buddy check. You know, he's like knowing what to look for, knowing how to feel, but he's like, there's no way to prepare yourself for it. You just have to negate it and not allow it to happen. You know, always look out for each other is a big thing. You know, learn of hypoxia, think about it. But think about something like this that we could take into civilian skydiving, that you could jump with something this big and a small bottle attached to you. It's almost like, you know, most people in big waves have 15 pounds of weights on when something like this would be practical to eliminate any sort of waste of jumps, if you will, waste of time, safety. There's a lot to something like this that we could develop into the civilian application. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, BK. So when I look at that video, I see a number of issues. I see the hose ends that make me really cross. I see someone towing an oxygen tube in free fall because they've just held onto it or tucked it into their helmet and then forgot about it, which probably was an indication that they were hypoxic as well. And I see regularly on the big ways that I've been on is people get the run-in call 2 minutes before in a formation jump and they put the oxygen down. So at the most hypoxic part of the skydive, in the worst atmosphere, when they start using all their energy moving around the aircraft and they've just taken their oxygen off at the most crucial time. And it's not, the education isn't there, the awareness isn't there, and you start to see things like this as a result. And I think there's probably been a number of canopy collisions and free fall collisions and failed attempts at records that are due to hypoxia. I don't think we blame hypoxia often enough. We could talk about the human factors behind that until the cows come home. There's a lot of denial, there's a lot of bravado, and there's a lot of the fact that people just don't later, like the presenter in the video, he felt that he was doing everything fine at the time. In fact, he thought he'd outwitted the guy asking the questions. People ask me, do I think people should go into the chamber to experience hypoxia for themselves? And I don't think it's a bad thing, but I don't actually think that you learn anything more for yourself. You learn more by watching somebody else because you don't recall anything about the hypoxic event at the time. Maybe if you can get a video of yourself, you're going to learn that, yes, it really, really does affect you. It's not just the other guys. The other reason that we don't blame hypoxia often enough is it doesn't leave an evidence trail, and it always makes me think of flying and aviation. I'm not sure if there's any pilots in the room, but there's a phenomena that happens in piston-powered aircraft called carb icing, where the aircraft takes off, ice forms in the carburetor of the engine, causes a complete engine failure or loss of power. And then, of course, by the time the aeroplane's crashed and everyone's got there, the ice is melted and there's absolutely no evidence about what went wrong. And everyone goes, I don't know, maybe it ran out of fuel, I don't know. But as a professor of mine at medical school said, if it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's probably a duck. So if you are in a hypoxic scenario where hypoxia is likely and someone's behaving in an irrational or sub-performance way, there's a very, very good chance that hypoxia is part of the problem. So in summary, hypoxia is very dangerous, and it also, we always think about absolute safety, but I think we also need to think about poor performance. And poor performance can be the first series in a chain of events that makes an incident or an accident. It's insidious, you don't often see it coming in, it's very, very common. I don't think we recognise it in skydiving. I think it's very easy to do oxygen badly. But I think that with education and awareness, we can improve safety, we can improve performance of skydivers doing these, attempts to push the boundaries. We're seeing more and more inquiries from people doing wingsuits. They know they want to jump high altitudes. They know they want to fly for a very long time. It's a difficult position that they're going to hold. They're going to use a lot of energy. And so I think it's really important that if you do use oxygen, you do it right. And I'm going to leave you with a 6 or 7 minute video. Please feel free to leave if you're out of time and move on to something better. But we had the great privilege of helping Red Bull and the Soul Flyers from Skydive Dubai make that record attempt, and a fantastic bit of skydiving. It's a great video. And then please feel free to grab any of us for questions, but we're going to leave the video playing. Thanks for listening. If you could play the video, guys.